It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump. So it's,
Craig Price is the man.
I knew it. Craig, shut up.
it's Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, my good pal Jessica Pettitt discusses her new book, Good Enough Now. Welcome to the podcast. I know, it's been a while. Just a quick explanation. A confluence of my schedule and lack of guests combined to make June a non-starter for the podcast. It took about 6 years, but it finally came to a drought. I'm still looking for quality guests, but since I'm not going to National Speakers Association's annual convention this year, that means two things. Number one, no speakers roundtable, and more importantly, number two, a severe lack of guests that I would have stockpiled while there. So, if you have a quality guest that you think should be on the show, email Craig at speakercraigprice.com right now and let me know. I'm scheduling through the summer and I need your help. Now, I could have BS'd my way through that explanation, touting imaginary guests that are not coming on the show, but I try to be as open and as honest as I can. Some people call that being, quote-unquote, authentic. I call it being me, faults and all, and that is the crux of Jessica's new book, Good Enough Now, How Doing the Best We Can with What We Have is Better Than Nothing. And if anyone knows Jess, she's a straight shooter and as authentic as they come. Her new book covers dealing with self-doubt, being true to yourself. It's a guide to ridding yourself of self-doubt, self-limiting beliefs, and habitual excuses, which is something I excel at. Her book is out today, so go to Amazon right now while you listen and get it. So let's get back into the swing of things with one of my favorite people of all time, Jessica Pettitt. You've got the great new book out. Now, one of the things that you're always talking about, not only in this new book, but in general, is you're talking about authenticity and being authentic. And I think nowadays, authenticity can often be used as a blunt instrument because Bill Cosby had this bit about someone explaining cocaine to him. And basically he was saying, well, cocaine, it just takes your personality and enhances it. It's just like being authentic. Being authentic is just being who you are. But then, of course, the question is, what if you're a jerk?
Uh-huh.
So if your authentic self
or not disclosing you're using cocaine.
Well, so what happens if your authentic self is not as palatable as you think it is?
Well, I mean, ultimately, that's a really great question. But at least you're not as palatable being yourself versus being somebody that you think somebody else wants you to be. To me, when I think about authenticity, there's so many people that really think that this is like a vitamin or something, and that you can, or doing a 5K, you get a t-shirt that's evidence that you've done it. So once you have a t-shirt that says you're authentic, you're done. But the act of being authentic is an ongoing struggle that you never finish.
It's one of the
and whether or not other people like that or not almost becomes irrelevant because it's just who you are.
Well, I find it very odd that especially in our circle of folks, and not necessarily friends, but when at NSA as speakers, we meet all speakers of all types, that being authentic is such a big puzzle for so many. And I know for you, you are exactly who you are every time I see you. It's weird. When you're on stage, you're off stage, if you've had a bad day, if you had a good day, you are who you are. And I'd like
True, and it's still a puzzle even for me. I still am insecure. I still question whether or not I'm showing up in an appropriate manner, if I'm being received in a way that I want to be received. But I find it's just so much less work to just be yourself than to try to be what you think other people want, which is honestly why I wrote the book.
Yeah, and the book is Good Enough Now, How Doing the Best We Can with What We Have is Better Than Nothing, which sounds like common sense, but then again, common sense is no longer common.
That is very true. Yeah, so basically what I've done is I've taken the 20 years of really challenging topics, hard conversations, diversity training, and education, and what I've realized is the number one kind of excuse that people have, including myself, in doing good work is they don't think they're good enough. And so if we were to be good enough, what could we accomplish? So the answer to that, at least in my world, was anything and everything. So then how do we get to the place where we can feel more confident in our goodness and more confident in our enoughness so that we would do something now, some of the time?
Well, I think it's that fraud syndrome that a lot of people have, because oftentimes when you see someone who is overconfident, who maybe they unbelievably believe in themselves so much, they often aren't the nicest people you've ever met. And so we're always like, I know I'm concerned that if I start to buy into my own BS, I know people who have done that and they're very successful, but they're not good people, the ones that I have met. So I'm always worried that am I going to have to go down that road to put food on my table and feed my family, or can I still be a good person and have confidence?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, that's kind of what led me down the path that resulted in the book, and that being good, what does being good mean? So in a social justice universe, I call these people like the social justice warriors, or I call them the cape wearers, who seem to know like the linguistic history of every word ever uttered. And there's a way of doing social justice work that really is like a weapon, to use kind of what you said about authenticity, where you like get other people screwing up and you kind of have this ongoing gotcha fighter warrior mode. And part of the reason why that's ineffective is it's very hard to build relationships or recruit people to your side when you're angry and constantly pointing out what everybody's doing wrong, especially if you haven't done your own sense of self-work, your own sense of self-reflection, which is where that authenticity piece comes in. So when I can have a challenging conversation with someone and it be received in a more authentic, with kind intention kind of manner, because I've clearly grappled with my own struggles, if not, present progressive tense of still grappling with my own personal struggles, which makes me more accessible and kind of like everybody else, instead of having all the answers and coming from high to tell you what you have done wrong. So without checking your ego, I don't think you can be authentic. But when you have the confidence to work through authenticity, it instead of egomaniac confidence, it comes with a sense of humility that allows you to realize that what you've got is good enough. I mean, no pun intended, but I'm a positive person, and I believe that we should be able to work with what we've got and not on a deficit model, waiting until we have something else. Like, we don't really have time to wait. We need to do something.
I think that's where a lot of folks stumble, is because in this world that we're living in now, and it seems like it's been getting worse and worse, you have to be, quote unquote, 100% right. You have to take a full-on position. There can be no gray. And I think being authentic like you're doing, that's all we are, is gray areas. We're constantly learning. We're not 100% confident. It's the people who are trying to bluff their way through it that causes the issues.
Mm-hmm. When I encourage my other people to do self-reflection work or do it myself, like I think what I call it is personal incongruencies. So that when you do your own self-work, there will be parts that you love about yourself. There are parts that you don't like about yourself at all. And then most of it is kind of incongruent. Meaning, so like, for example, and I will try my best not to bring up the most controversial options, because that's kind of where I live, but I identify as a pacifist. That does not mean that I'm not supportive of the military. I just wish we lived in a world where no one ever needed a military, right? So I'm supportive of people serving and veterans, and at the same time wish that wasn't needed.
Absolutely.
That is a place I come from. However, as a quote unquote pacifist, I also cuss a lot. And most swear words are rooted in violence, if not sexualized violence. And then even outside of cussing, like my phone blows up or I punch buttons on elevators. And that's what I mean by an inconsistency or incongruence, is that how I'm responsible for who and how I am. And I'm responsible for when that's incongruent with how I identify or how I live my life. Some of those incongruencies I can do something about. Those are the parts of me that I really want to change. And there are other parts of me that I don't want to invest the energy in changing those pieces. So I may not, but I'm at least responsible for noticing that I have those incongruent pieces to begin with.
And that kind of fits out the way you wrote the book, because Good Enough Now is not just the title, it's also the 3 parts of your book. So we're kind of talking right now about the good part, which is about identifying what you're good at and what you're not good at. You have like a behavior assessment in that area. What things are most people overlooking? I think doing self-assessments is difficult for a lot of people, because some things that they think they're good at, they're not. Mm-hmm. And other times, things that they kind of gloss over because it's easy for them, they don't understand how good they are at things. They're actually exceptional, but they don't really see that.
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer, specifically when thinking about speakers. Most of us speak on a topic that is the message we need to hear the most. So where we are the weakest and have the most learning to do is where we spend the most time teaching other people. It's one of the great ironies. But I think that this particular self-assessment tool, which you can take for free if you download the app Jessica Pettitt, which is Android and iPhone ready. You can also access it on my website, Good Enough Now. But the self-assessment, the trick about the self-assessment is there's no right answer. So I have been able to boil down kind of 20 years of experiences of working with myself and other people to determine that there's really 3 archetypes that kind of explain who and how we typically show up as. And I think I've talked about this on other podcasts with you, but when we typically show up, we show up with all of our judgments and assumptions about others, as well as judgments and assumptions about ourselves. And the key thing is to take responsibility for those patterns, or those response patterns of who and how we show up, and then leave room for edits. Meaning that as we get feedback, we listen to other people explain our impact on them or how we show up to them or with them, so we can leave room for edits for ourselves. If you're taking the self-assessment, what it really does is it gives you 12 kind of scenarios where you're quickly supposed to answer A, B, or C as to how are you most likely to respond. And people are like, well, it's complicated or it depends, etc. But that's even questioning the survey or the assessment tool is really typically how you show up, right? So it's kind of a silly little 12 question quiz where you get to pick of these responses, and then it kind of does the math, and it tells you that you are responding from this kind of place the most right now. But the real truth is that the 3 variables, head, heart, and action, show up in all of us all the time. So 2 of them are typically how we show up in a conscious way. And the 3rd one is still with us, just sometimes it's more unconscious. I believe what I call the 3rd rail, it's similar to the subway system in New York. The 3rd rail is the thing you don't touch because it can electrocute you and kill you. But the 3rd rail is also the thing that powers the subway to begin with. So once we realize, these are the 2 we always show up with, which makes this the 3rd one. The 3rd one is what fuels all of our excuses, as well as accelerates, or it kind of gas pedals us through really tough times. So once we know that about ourselves, then we get to what I think is kind of the real work, is that we then have to provide that space, leave room for edits, providing space in the same manner for other people, because the other people might just be enough. They might be different than you. They might have different opinions, but they might be enough.
And that leaving room for edits is something that, since we've last talked alone, you've been on the podcast with other speakers, and since we've done one-on-one, this leaving room for edits is something that you've really developed since then. I saw you do a wonderful presentation in front of all our peers at NSA on it, even though it was very short. Talk about leaving room for edits, because I think people say they do it, because I think most people want to believe they're open-minded, but that doesn't mean they're actually filling in the blanks, or they're actually making edits. They're just leaving the space blank.
Yeah. The concept really comes around, and you kind of touched on this earlier, that we're always right. So none of us like to be wrong. So let's just go with the premise that we're all right. We're all right. We're always right. Can we provide room for someone else to be differently right? Now, I'm not going down some philosophical, moral relativist slippery slide here, but the concept of differently right, it does not necessarily mean I was wrong, because heaven forbid I be wrong, or heaven forbid someone else be wrong. We're much better at that. But the idea that someone else's truth could be differently right than the story that I wrote. So I don't believe that you can never, ever, ever make judgments and assumptions. And I know a lot of diversity trainers, that's how they pay their mortgage. But by trying to never, ever, 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 ever make judgments and assumptions, the diversity trainer is paying their mortgage, and the person they're training feels guilty and ashamed because they catch themselves making judgments and assumptions. Yeah. So I'm a bigger fan of just working with the judgments and assumptions we already make. So then if we're already making them, then and only then can we notice the patterns of the judgments and assumptions we do make. And if we notice the patterns of the judgments and assumptions we do make, we make those to feel safe and to feel prepared. So that doesn't invalidate all of the experiences that have led me to this behavioral pattern. And once you know what that is, you print that story out. You print those judgments and assumptions out with a sense of curiosity, a sense of vulnerability, a sense of generosity and authenticity, expecting edits. Yeah. So here's your story. You don't put it in 3-point font written in Sharpie marker. It's lots of triple space with extra wide margins, and you actively seek new information so your story can get righter.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like negativity. It's not something you can eliminate. Assumptions and judgments are not something you can eliminate, but you can reduce it. Because I to say someone not to judge someone it's impossible. We're judging machines. That's our brains work. That's how we work. It's how we solve problems. It's how we identify dangers. It's how we get through life. It's just a matter of making sure those false assumptions don't trip us up any more than our correct assumptions help us out.
Right. Or I would use accurate and inaccurate, So like to get it off people for a second, sometimes I think it's easier to kind of find the skill in a different place. So when you're parallel parking, while you're driving by and you find a space, you have to very quickly assess the size of the space, the size of your car, oncoming traffic, and your ability to parallel park. We are much more likely to think that the space somehow got smaller than we are really bad at parallel parking.
Oh, well.
So then we either avoid parallel parking or we blame the space. So what I'm suggesting is that perhaps if you leave some room, maybe you misjudged the space or you made an assumption that it would fit. Then you're using the same skills of the judgments and assumptions to then be able to monitor those patterns.
Well, two things I avoid: parallel parking and turning left on a more than 4-lane road. So it's like I will go a mile out of my way to take 3 rights so I don't have to cross in front of traffic because I just don't trust other people because as a defensive driver instructor. So I can definitely see how people do that because like 80% of people think they're excellent or above average drivers, and mathematically that's impossible.
That's impossible. Exactly.
So leaving room from edits is a huge factor that a lot of people need to really work on. What about the now part? Because I think we can probably tell if we're good or bad at something by how successful we are, especially over time. I mean, if you consistently do something and it's not painful and it's not necessarily easy, but it's not a failure, you can kind of say, "Hey, I'm not bad at that. I'm good at this, or I'm great at this." And then we don't have to be perfect. But what about the now? I think getting people to do things is the hardest part.
Well, interestingly, my book actually follows my model. It's like I planned it that way. So like the good part comes with a self-assessment tool and definitions and measurements and things. So head doesn't mean intellectual. It just means details, vocabulary, and systems. And so that's the good part. Heart does not mean like maternal or emotional, but it means taking specific things and connecting them to something larger than yourself, like the concept of enough. It's not perfect, but coming from this teeny tiny thing, I'm connecting it to this larger thing. Okay, I'm going to try this. So then the now section of the book is the action-oriented piece, which does not mean exercise, but it means
good.
Exactly, the doing, the implementation piece. So some people show up, they don't want, so I think of planning a wedding. Some people do not want to sit in a meeting and debate what color the napkin should be. Other people, that's their dream. Some people, their dream is planning who's going to sit at which table so that everybody has the best time possible. There's other people who just want to know, where do you want me to move the chairs? Like this pile to this pile. All three of those people are needed for wedding planning. But because it's a book, I didn't want to lose the high action-oriented people. And because all three variables are in us, for some, the action-oriented, like you said, is the hardest part for people to do. But inaction is also an action. Not doing anything is an action-based response. So the action, or the third section of the book, really gets to okay, so when you are going to have a conversation or try to make a connection with another human being, what do you need to do so that that goes better? So it's all about better connections.
Well, what are some things we can do right now to make a difference? So if we're going to do some stuff now, what are some things that you've got in the book that will allow us to just go out there without even having to buy the book? We can just go do it.
Well, I think taking this free self-assessment is helpful because you're able to see kind of who and how you are. And then I encourage other people on your team or people you're kind of forced to work with or your family members or something, they take it too. So then the concept of differently right is able to occur because people favor a variable in different ways. That's the first thing. So that it's not necessarily people are wrong because they're responding in a different way than you. It's because they're right and responding in a different way than you. So you're able to have a more personalized way of having a conversation. But I think really the whole book really is about doing self-work. So at the end, no spoilers, but at the end, the idea of being able to make better connections really kind of rotates around 5 steps. So the first one is you need to notice your own behaviors and your own patterns. Then you need to shut up and really listen to people for feedback on your patterns, on who and how you are when you show up. If you can listen to others as if they are wise, it's going to help you be able to notice the patterns about yourself. It's really hard to kind of know who and how you are without other people validating it or kind of arguing a different point. So notice is step 1, listening is step 2. Step 3 is when you do uncover a pattern, whether you like it or not, it's your job and nobody else's, not even your therapist's job, to figure out what are the roots of that behavior pattern. So when you can figure out oh, this is related to something that happened to my dad, or this is something related to 4th grade, or this is related, and I use a lot of specific examples in the book. But if you can find the root of that behavior, you then can decide to keep it and take responsibility for it, or edit it. I don't want to do this anymore. And if you don't want to do it anymore, then you need to work on forgiveness or distance or restructuring that particular pattern. Noticing, listening, and finding the roots. Those are the 3 most important steps. The last one is the most action-oriented one that is the most flummoxing, if that's a word of other people, it's try. So a lot of times we don't act because we don't know that we're going to be perfect. We don't know that we're going to get 100% or an A+ or it's going to succeed, so we do nothing. Yeah. But if we can create a mindset where we encourage ourselves and others to reward trying to try, if we can reward creativity or thinking outside of the box or attempts that may lead to failure, then what we're doing is we're creating a much more inclusive space of creativity that may lead to errors, but may also lead to amazing solutions that we'd never thought about. But I don't think we can foster a safe sense of trying to try until we notice, listen, and really uncover the roots of those patterns. And then step 5 is repeat, similar to shampooing your hair. You can't do this once. You can't do yoga once and you're done for life. This is a practice that we have to do on the regular.
Well, I wanted to save this up for the last thing because we're running out of time, but one of the last things, because you were talking about better connections, and it's really difficult nowadays, I think, to make connections because it just seems like everybody is just shutting people down and removing people from their lives or avoiding certain types of people.
Unfriending them.
Yeah, I unfollow. I don't unfriend because that way they don't know. But it's one of those things I don't need to see all their crazy stuff if I don't want to. But you're one of those situations where I know you. I know politically how you lean. And yet you have some friends that I know lean hard in the other direction. We both have friends that do that. It's one of the things that I see you do that is, very inspiring for a lot of folks, is because you have friends of all types.
Yep.
In this world where just the phrase social justice can turn people angry because they don't understand what's going on, how can you make those connections? How can you make better connections? Because I'm awful at making connections, mostly because I don't want to. It's I'm happy to be here at home with my dogs talking to someone through electronics than to go out into the world and have to deal with them in person, because I'm constantly trying not to make judgments and then trying not to slap people. So how can we make better connections when things are so polarized right now?
Well, there a couple things come to mind, and the first one I think is a lesson I learned from Mother Teresa. So in all my research on Mother Teresa, who is a classic head-heart person, so slow to act, lots of research. But one of the things that I was really impressed with her in her work is that she constantly questioned what she believed in. So whatever it is you believe in, if you have never questioned it, then you probably don't know why you believe what you believe. But if you question it and you come back to it, you're just going to believe in it that much stronger. So one of the things that's really important to me is to have really close friends, not just Facebook friends, but like really close friends in my immediate life that are very, very different believers or have very different perspectives in the world, because I'm hoping that they will help me question what it is that I believe in. And it's very hard to be polarized by someone that you see as a real asset to your own self-work. I would like to think that they would say something similar to me and that maybe I help them question. And then if we come back to our different beliefs, we at least know that we believe what we believe. I think that that's a really, really important piece. The other thing that I would say is I am responsible for my own echo chamber. It is very, very easy to surround yourself by people or news sources that just constantly agree with you. But I'm responsible for my ego and my own sense of inflated narcissism. So by virtue of having someone who is different than me, it can check my own thoughts. Now, I'm not saying I don't get frustrated. Sure, I get frustrated at close family members even. But the frustration is about me and not about them. That's my behavior pattern. I'm getting frustrated. So sometimes I'm able to have much more controversial conversations on topic A than I am topic B, but it's because I'm not ready to have a conversation about topic B yet. That's my responsibility. So I think that those two things really help. When you said polarizing, one of the things that I've been coming up quite a bit, and it's definitely good timing for my book, is we are being told that we are an incredibly polarized culture right now. But none of this is new. And we can't be polarized unless we play into that. So instead of me continually telling people, oh, we're so polarized, I am intentionally not being polarizing. I'm intentionally trying to be inclusive. Now, inclusive is another one of those words like social justice that can scare people. But I believe in order to do real inclusion work, I have to pay attention to who am I excluding first. And then when I figure out who am I excluding, why am I excluding them? There's a difference between feeling uncomfortable and a lack of safety. So if I feel uncomfortable but safe, I try to lean in to the groups or the opinions that I've been excluding. so that I can actually create and foster a more inclusive environment for me to be in. That's the exact opposite of being polarizing. But I can do that. I'm responsible for that.
Well, the book is Good Enough Now, How Doing the Best We Can with What We Have is Better Than Nothing. Jessica, where can people get the book and, more importantly, get you to come to them?
Absolutely. So both are available through goodenoughnow.com. Really appreciate the support, and whether we're talking about books or keynotes or workshops or online programs or any of my other products, I try to keep everything available, and it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of service because these conversations are so important. So there's something that fits every situation and every budget.
Well, I always tell a lot of my guests, not all of them, but most of my guests, it's great talking to them, but I rarely tell them how much I love them. Jessica, both my wife and I, we love you to death, and we hope to see you soon.
You are the best, and I love you more than pictures of baby animals.
That's the show. Thanks to Jess for coming on. If you have a guest suggestion, comment, or question, please email me at craig@speakercraigprice.com. Also, the Podcast Awards are taking nominations, so head over to podcastawards.com and nominate Reality Check for whatever category you see fit now through July 31st. We'll catch you next week, I hope. Still looking for a guest, so, stay tuned.